me, so this is all my thoughts. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, the purpose of this presentation is to interchange ideas on regarding performing IV&V on product line software. This will be a short presentation because I'm going to pose two questions that I would really like response on and comments about. Consider this a crowdsourced exercise where I'm polling all of the participants on this telecom as a crowd. Next slide. Here are my definitions of product line software for spacecraft flight software use. Product line software is a series of software deliveries produced by a developer for use in different space missions that share commonalities that present advantages of reduced cost and higher reliability through reuse. And heritage software are software components that have flown successfully that can be or are to be used again in other spacecraft, and they can either be unchanged or they can be modified. Next slide. Okay, if there's any doubt on the net about the reuse of software, this chart ought to prove that its scale can be very significant. Here are 5 projects that have had IV&V done on them. I'm not going to name them for ITAR reasons, but this represents a measure of what the reuse of the software modules in the flight software was across these 5 projects. Project 1 is the earliest, and it moves successively to the left to the newer project. Now let's examine what we're talking about here. Okay, let's take the line of new modules. Okay, these are modules that are coded from scratch for each project. Over on the right-hand side, we see a percentage of 32%, 35 modules out of 110 were new on project 1. Moving to the left, we see the percentage drop to 16. To 7, to 9, and finally to 3. Now, conversely, looking at the bottom, you see the sum total, and I'll explain reuse and redata in a moment. The heritage modules, we started out at 68%, 82%, 91%, 91%, and finally in Project 5, 97% of the flight software are reused. Now, they can be reused in a couple of ways. As pointed out, let's use the term reuse to represent modules that are used without any modification whatsoever. And you see they start at 18% on Project 1, and by Project 5, it's up to over half of the modules are reused straightforwardly. The redata represents changes to heritage modules in the form of a table update. No structural change to the code. And re-engineer is the other part. It represents modules that have been modified structurally that are reused. I think it's extremely interesting to look at this. I don't know who has ever looked at this. I know that there are people that wrote heritage review reports for each of these projects. I wrote the one from one of the ones on the right. But this gives you a snapshot of the way software is reused, at least by one developer. Okay, and these have been over the last maybe 6 years. And it only refers to module count. It's not talking about software lines of code, but it is somewhat correlated to the size of the modules as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, for those that aren't aware of it, if we have heritage software on a project, the developer practice is that the developer is obliged to assert to us, and it's not just to IV&V, it's to all the stakeholders, why is it advantageous to use heritage components, and how any risks that are associated with their use will be mitigated. So they stand up in their design reviews early on and say, here's what we're going to do, and here's why. Now, a developer might, can, or maybe even usually also describe the prior use of the early components, their intended use on the new mission, and describe the changes in the modified components, the rationale for any reduction of rigor in the testing, and might just take a conservative approach and test all modified components as if they were used. If they were used. Okay, and occasionally a developer will put this all into what we would call a heritage artifact. That is, it's an extensive description of this. And perhaps in earlier times they weren't as extensive. Next slide. On the IV&V side, the practice is we have an IV&V heritage review conducted by one of the IV&V team members. The report is written and it addresses the following questions about each of the asserted software heritage modules. Number one is the functionality that's the same. That is it going to be used the same as it was in the previous mission? If it's not the same, what are the functional changes? What are the effects of the hardware differences between the target system and the heritage system? And how do these changes affect each module? Have all heritage mission IV&V issues that could affect the module's reuse status been satisfactorily closed? And then finally, have the reuse modules actually been used operationally? Okay, so you see our practice takes advantage of what we've done before in parallel to what the developer has done before. And anything that we found, shall we say, amiss with previous software that's proposed for heritage, we are obliged to make sure that that issue is closed properly. And any issues that we discovered during this heritage review, IV&V heritage review, are identified as always and recorded, reported, tracked, and resolved. Next slide. Okay, and in doing the heritage review, the IV&V analyst that does the heritage review have these resources in addition to what we received from the developer. We've got our orbit issue database, we've got our own orbit anomaly research team, we've got project closeout reports, we've got pertinent project heritage reviews, as I mentioned, access to the spacecraft configuration database, and our IV&V lessons learned. And then external to IV&V, we've got the mission point of contact personnel for the target mission that we're performing IV&V on. And then, of course, the missions have their projects have websites. There's a NASA anomaly database, a lessons learned database at NASA, and an engineering network lessons learned. And then we've got the NASA Engineering Safety Center as resources to be used in the preparation of our IV&V heritage. Next slide. Okay, these are the two questions I'd like to pose to you. Number one, should there be any changes to our current IV&V process for heritage components? And let me first be sure to say that I am very impressed with our current practice. I'm not in the least on a witch hunt, but good management practices lead us to periodically step back, take a look at how we're doing things, and see if there's something that we could do that would be better. So that's one question. And the other question is, if we have a developer that's considering developing or initiating a product line approach to software, what should we expect from a developer who is doing that, who is establishing a new product line approach to software development? Okay, those are the two questions. Consider yourself, each and every one, whole like some comments coming in through our question line. Next slide. Okay, discussion points. Let me pose these to stir perhaps maybe your thinking here. Number one, should IV&V establish a multi-project information management system that supports tracing of all requirements, code testing, and issues across all projects for each product line? Yes, we have a lot of repositories. We have a lot of ways of accessing that. To my knowledge, we don't have an explicit one that says here's a new project that's being done by a product line development developer. What is the, shall we say, expedient way of retrieving all the heritage information that would be associated with, let's say, a TNC attitude control module? And part of that would be, it seems, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like we do this in a stepwise fashion, that our heritage reports don't necessarily look beyond the parent project. It does not go back to the grandparent or beyond that. Number two, should we run a diff compare between each heritage module with its processors? And I mean that both by requirements and by code. My belief is probably we already are doing this compares between requirements. I don't know specifically if we do it with code, and I'd like some information on that, please. Okay, number three, this is one just to stir your imagination a bit. Should a unit test of a non-modified heritage module, unmodified, so they're using it exactly as it's used before, should a unit test be optional on that if prior unit testing can be proven? Now, this might be a myth, but I think it's worth considering because of the thought processes that we go through here. So here we have a developer asserting that he's going to use this NNC module just like he used it last time and maybe even the time before. And he says, we don't need to run unit tests. We've got it under configuration control, lock and key, and we know it's exactly the same. Well, what is the proof that would be acceptable for such a way of doing business? And the number four might be obvious, but should integrated tests assume that all heritage modules are used? In other words, there isn't any difference between a given integrated test having to do that's relevant to any of the heritage involved. Okay. Any other thoughts that you might have? I appreciate that. I've certainly heard a lot and been impressed by what's going on in the AMF activity. The question would be, would use of AMF with regard specifically to product line software, heritage software, improve the practice that we're doing currently?
Charley.
Okay, next chart.
Hang on, Charlie.
Yes, Brandon.
Okay, so some of the points you talked about before, we already been making on our side a lot more heritage-based stuff. So, particularly that vertical, we're trying to do that with, I don't know if you were at our checkpoint last week, but we do have a tool where we're going to have all of our legacy analysis, our evidence collected in there, and we're going to potentially reuse a lot of that for OREX and insights. So that's, and I think we can get this on the code level. At some cases, I don't know if it's all across the board, we will be doing this based on payment. So particularly when they claim like re-engineered data or reuse our module, we're going to get with what they say the parent is, which is maybe to determine if there's any inconsistencies there.
It's a CD effort.
Okay.
Okay, I appreciate those comments, Brandon. Do you have any further comments on what else is on the page?
None in the room. Anybody online, you're welcome to enter your comments in the Q&A section. I will share them with everybody.
Okay, well, let me ask Brandon, in what you're doing, do you see a role for the AMF architecture? Or is it too soon to tell on
No, so
where AMF is?
that's interesting. I missed the AMF intro that was on the first day. I'm going to go back and look at it. I've seen the other two AMF ones. I'm trying to understand exactly what role that would play for us. Because we have a tool that we're using, smart access, front end, SQL back end, so print out the evidence, mapping, requirement code, tests, and all that stuff. Since that data is already in there for one mission, and our analysts are familiar with that, that's the way we're planning to go forward. But definitely having all the data in one place in a tool like AMF or Smart or wherever it is, definitely beneficial so that you can essentially reuse some of the analysis. But AMF, I'm not smart enough on it yet to see how it'll play a role. I know Charley's he's seen some presentations, he's interested as well, so I wouldn't mind talking with him.
Okay, appreciate that. Okay, the chart up is really the last chart. Let's talk about that a moment. So what would we want from a project? I know there's people that are probably on the loop that have written heritage reports, and certainly a lot of people that have reviewed them. Okay, so what comprises what we want from a project in the form of a heritage artifact? And I think these are all pretty much what we get now. The heritage software identification, the rationale for use, traceability of prior project software, description of prior use, identification of all issues, descriptions of all modifications, identification of the test plan differences between heritage and new modules, all risk mitigation assertions and rationale. I put number 9 on there because the time of the day and the time of we are in our excellent workshop. A little bit of humor release there. What I don't have in there on this page, but I want to pose it as well, what kind of a multi-project management system, a multi-project information management system would we recommend to a new product line developer? Now, I guess it kind of goes back to what Brandon was saying. He's using a system that seems to be working pretty well in his project. And as we both said, we've heard a lot about AMF this week. It's a capability development. The guys are working on it 1 day a week. We understand that. But if we were counseling a new developer, if we took both of those systems and elevated up, what kind of a recommendation would we make to a new developer as far as how that developer should manage product line software? Okay, last slide. Probably have hit most everybody cold with this. I would appreciate some follow-on. There's my email address there. If you have any questions or comments, opinions, or any kind of discussion, I'll definitely reply and interact with you. Essentially, I'm looking for more information from the IV&V effort, please.
Okay, are there any comments or questions for Charlie in the room? Go ahead, Brandon.
Yes, Charley, what's the, plan, since you wrapped up the CD, is it done, going on, what's the status?
It's funded for 13, but I've still got 2 more weeks to work on it. And it can be a high priority, so that's the time frame that I'd like to have responsible.
Okay, I was just trying to figure out where you were, if you had, you got stuff to report or whatnot. Like, now that I'm involved in all that last bit, have you been talking with Charlie Brower at all?
No, frankly, with all the other things I've got going on, this one hasn't progressed as much as I wanted. I didn't intend to send out a white paper a couple of months ago even.
Okay, so I just recommend for this thing wrapped up, just schedule something with myself and Charlie.
Okay. All right, appreciate that.
Does anybody on the phone have any comments or questions for Charlie?
Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question or a comment.
Well, do we have anybody on the phone?
We have a question from Joe.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to discuss with Charlie the software reuse situation of ISS. It's a little bit of an interesting situation because we have several computers that have common functionality, and the developer simply copied, in some cases, the code. For example, the Sarge and Targe, Sarge being the rotating solar arrays on the space station, and Targe referring to the radiators, have a lot of common functionality, but the developer simply copied the code and is maintaining two code sets which are very similar in functionality, except he just renamed whatever it says Sarge, he wrote it in Targe, for example. So it would be interesting to see how you might want to manage that a little more efficiently in terms of all this duplicate and testing, and because the code is should be the same. And of course, the other situation we have is the operating system, which is common in all the modules, but the code in PVCS looks a lot better because there it's all under common. But we duplicate a lot of testing, which may be overkill. I mean, maybe this is water under the bridge because ISS is a very mature project, and we've already completed a lot of this work already, so now we're into maintenance mode where we're dealing with software upgrades. So, but I think it would be a worthwhile study to maybe look at how ISS has handled all this and how it could be maybe improved from our point of view.
Okay, I appreciate that, Joe. That's a good input.
We have a question from Mary.
Mary?
Oh, hi, Charles. Good to hear from you again. Just a comment, and it ties more in a little bit with we talked with Brandon, and maybe a little bit of what Joe said with the duplicate testing. Coming out from where I am, which is a little more FDA-driven, where form on devices, a lot of times these news modules, we'll take a look at them like a case-by-case basis. And if it's something that has already been validated, it's under change control, we might take the stance of what we have is what's called external vendor auditing, which might be more of your software quality assurance group than your IV&V group, where we'll actually ask the developer, not just for the rationale, we'll go in and take an audit and take a look at that developer and then their testing as well. And then we'll take a look at it case by case. And it's usually some night testing, especially in integration areas, what was changed under change control, those types of testing. But we don't go back through the full A to Z just because of the expense.
Okay. Okay.
So just to give you a little different flavor there.
Yeah. Good point, Mary. I appreciate that. That's another, you're right. That's a different viewpoint. Good. Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments or questions for Charlie? All right, Charlie, I don't have any comments to share with you on the internet. I was hoping I would get some comments pop up because we do have 70-some people on there, but maybe they're waiting so they can email you.
Okay, I appreciate that. I appreciate all the input.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Yep, if you want to head over to the breakout, we might have somebody think of something and meet you over there, okay?
Okay, I'll go there.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks, Charlie. All right, we're going to transition over to our next presentation here. We'll just go ahead and get started with SARMA.